All right, everybody, welcome back to the Weekend Debrief here on FingerLakes1.com. I'm Josh Durso, joined in studio by Ted Baker and Jackie Augustine. She's back. Ted is the host of Finger Lakes Morning News on Finger Lakes News Radio, and Jackie is the co-creator of this podcast, actually, and is very active in the city of Geneva. Of course, approximately 2 million community organizations that have your handprints on them from some point or another. So, Jackie, thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to make it back here.
I am so excited to be back. It's
been a while.
I miss you guys.
It's been a while.
I know, it has.
We have got a ton to talk about today. Of course, Ted and I have been kind of hashing out some of these topics over the last few weeks, but I wanted to start with the wild scenario playing out in the Moravia Central School District. A principal there will be paid upwards of approximately $380,000 after accepting an early retirement deal. Ted and I talked about this last week. He was placed on administrative leave for unknown reasons to most, it seems, even to him, during the second half of last school year. And this deal, which of course is subject to an NDA, is a general mystery to everybody in the public. Not sure how much of this story you got to read. I think you got to read a little bit of it at least. Yep. The question I want to ask you, because you and I for the longest time always talked about transparency and how important that was in government. Should there be a better process for handling these kinds of scenarios so that they don't end with two sides signing an NDA and a $380,000 check being written and lifetime health insurance to an administrator who has probably already made hundreds of thousands of dollars for the last several consecutive years without some public knowledge about why all of this happened?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think there should be more disclosure. In general, non-disclosure agreements, I think, are, if they have any use, it should be in very limited circumstances. But I mean, for me, the transparency issue really comes in at the beginning when these contracts are being negotiated, because, I don't think you can hold it against the guy for cashing out what he's entitled to under the contract, but you could certainly hold the board accountable for entering into a contract like that in the first place. Like, he's getting $120,000 for 210 unused sick days. That's $580 a day. I mean, this is not specific to school district contracts. Like, I'm pro-union, right? But collective bargaining agreements include, like, there usually aren't caps on sick days or unused vacation time, and then you can cash them out at full salary. That should not be it, right? Everyone should have to take their unused sick days at a very, very reduced rate, because the reason you have sick days is not just to be ill, it's also for mental health, for just doing stuff in your life that's going to keep you a well-balanced person. So this whole idea that we're rewarding people for banking this kind of stuff doesn't make any sense to me. But that is just kind of the underlying lack of transparency that now I think is really leaving a bad taste in people's mouth, now that they don't even know why this payout is happening. Like, what is the reason for this? So I think maybe that's actually a culmination of enough things that will generate enough outrage that some of this stuff will change. I mean, that's always my perpetual hope, right? That eventually people are going to be like, well, we're not going to do that again.
It's funny because after you and I talked about this last week, Ted, I thought to myself, I'm kind of surprised that this never tripped off any alarm bells in Albany. Like, that this wasn't, when you go back to the state, that this didn't trigger any kind of, hey, wait a second, this small school district in Cayuga County is paying $300,000 to an administrator to leave? I mean, that's the part of it to me that almost seems more questionable in terms of transparency, going back to like the oversight portion of this, because transparency is only as good as the oversight is, right? I mean, that's kind of like the other part of this.
Yeah, I agree, but I think your premise there is that this would be an outlier or would be unusual. I'm not sure it is. I mean, look at, again, just limited experience just from Geneva, but when police chiefs retire, I mean, this is when any department had a management contract. When people retire, there are big payouts, and lifetime health insurance used to be standard practice. I mean, I think people are moving away from that a little bit more, but people need to understand what the cost is, because it's not just like single person.
Right.
It's you're vested in whatever plan, your family plan. And that, I mean, healthcare is important, and I definitely think it should be provided to people in their contracts. But this is, it adds up.
I can't even imagine what the lifetime cost of that feature of this, retirement package actually is. I mean, if the person lives 30 years after they retire, I mean, you're talking about millions of dollars at that point.
Yeah, people used to get it in Geneva for serving on city council. Now, granted, that ended way before I was on, so please, before everybody's like, oh, she's getting, no. But there are still former council people living in Geneva who have city health insurance, which to me is crazy, because that's like a part-time job. I mean, it hasn't been this year for this group, but usually if it's...
Well, and it's treated as a part-time job, whether it is or is not.
So I think people need more information about why this happened, but also how they got a contract like this in the first place.
Yeah. Ted, any residual thoughts after our talk last week on this one?
Well, like I said when we talked, the other issue is the rush to judgment, that accusation equals guilt. If the board had gone more slowly in this, they might not have had to reach this agreement, because like I said, the fact that they're willing to pay this much money to somebody leads one to the inescapable conclusion that they were wrong, or that the charges had little to no merit. If there was some misconduct there, then you tell them, be on your way and be happy we're not calling the police.
Yeah.
So I mean that's part of it, but then it's maybe we shouldn't be giving long-term contracts to people with all these benefits tied in. It's like in sports where they hire a coach and they pay him $5 million a year on a 5-year contract, and then 2 years in they don't want him anymore, and now it costs you $15 million to get rid of him.
Yeah, and that's kind of part of the in my mind, it always kind of amazes me that these things never wind up, and I understand boards of all shapes and sizes hide behind the personnel. It's a personnel matter. We can't discuss this. It's a personnel matter. I think there is, at least in public, court of public opinion, there has been a shift over the last 10, 15, 20 years where folks are much less sympathetic to that. You're working for the taxpayers. You're working in a job that is funded entirely by taxpayers. And at the end of the day, you need to some degree be held accountable to the public that you're serving. Right. And I think, and I'm not exactly sure how a Board of Education would go about this, but along the way, to your point, there needed to be, at the very least, better communication, right, about this happening, because the first we heard about it was about a month after he had already been placed on leave at a Board of Education meeting, where the news just kind of like popped out at the public, and the public found out. And then the principal is posting to Facebook after that and saying, this is all, and it is just a wild lapse in communication.
Right. If you're telling us that our kid's principal is no longer worthy of being their principal, then I think we deserve some sort of explanation, even if you want to make it extremely generic. Mm-hmm. But we deserve some kind of explanation, not simply, we did this, personnel matter, don't ask us questions.
Well, and I think that speaks to the broader issue of how executive session or confidentiality for personnel is used across the state. I mean, if you look at the open meetings law, it's very particular in the kinds of things that you can't disclose. It doesn't say you can't make any statement as to the general subject. In fact, in property sale, you're supposed to name the property. You're supposed to give a general description. Sure, you can't give somebody's plans and credit and all that kind of stuff to the public. I understand, yeah, that should be protected. But at least they could say, this was an issue related to management style or to student interaction or parent, parent dispute. But that should not, I'm actually not even sure that the law would uphold keeping something like that. But who's going to sue to find out? I mean, I guess that's the question, right? Yeah. Who's going to bring an Article 78 against this and test it?
And to that end, I mean, boards quite literally every time they meet go into executive session for frankly incorrect reasons. Right. I mean, I've watched Seneca County and the smaller town boards in Seneca County do it more times than I can even count on all my hands, toes, and my friends' hands and toes too.
I've said here a number of times, and it still hasn't changed, the default position for many, if not most, governmental entities is secrecy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anytime they can.
Well, and it's the role of the press to ask those follow-up questions. So, I think we've seen that, and sometimes, and I think at Seneca County meetings, also, at Geneva, asking that follow-up question about what particular topic is this that you're going. If you say personnel, you still are supposed to name the employee. If you say sale or lease of city property or school district property, you're supposed to list the property. Like, it's not supposed to just be, legal.
Yeah.
Well, no, even if it's a legal matter, you're supposed to talk about what is the matter, and it's only if the litigation is pending. It can't just be like, we think we're going to get sued about this, so we better go talk in executive session. It's not how it works.
Well, and to that end, I mean, I can recall a number of times when David Shaw would, while we were both covering Seneca County meetings as an example, would ask that follow-up question before they take the vote to go into executive session, referring to the Seneca County Board of Supervisors. And it would be either brushed off or you'd get another sort of like generic canned line that's in front of them on an agenda, and that would be it. There wouldn't be any more than that. So it's almost as if, whether that, to some degree, and in some cases, whether that follow-up is answered or not, it still doesn't mean they're going into executive session for the right reasons.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about the pandemic. A Siena poll this week showed that New Yorkers are, by the numbers, apparently over the pandemic. That is to say, most of them think we're past the worst of it. COVID positivity rates, though, they're increasing across the board, not just in New York State, but across the entire country. And we keep hearing warnings from public health officials who say vaccinations have slowed down to a trickle. Are we getting ahead of ourselves is the first part of this question. And then the second part is what needs to change to boost vaccination rates among the people who have not yet been vaccinated? And I guess I'll start with you, Ted, since this was a topic you really want to talk about.
It's fascinating me how quietly this has happened. I mean, the governor puts out his daily releases and was bragging for 48 days in a row or whatever it was about the rate going down and down and down, and then suddenly it turned up. And when I looked at the national COVID deaths just the other day, where we are right now is eerily similar to where we were a year ago at this time, which was there was a bottoming out in June to early July, followed by a steady increase, followed by a huge spike in the winter. So if the trend holds, we may find ourselves right back where we were last December. I mean, that's here in New York, and then there are larger issues, including political ones nationwide, that we can get into.
So I guess part of my question to that is then, do we believe the numbers that say I'll call them the nationwide numbers that say we are like 60 to 65% vaccinated? Does that feel accurate if it also feels like we could potentially be getting ready to go back up this large slope?
Well, there's no reason to believe otherwise. I mean, here in New York, it's close to 70, I think. In other states, it's in the 30s, and overwhelmingly, the people getting infected right now across the country are the people who are unvaccinated.
Jackie, where do what are you seeing with this? What do you think is happening here?
Well, I mean, I'm not a public health official, but I have no reason to doubt what they're saying. Like, I think that's why we have public health officials, right? And they have said, if you don't get vaccinated, you are highly susceptible, particularly to this new variant, and we're seeing that happen. I really don't understand how anybody is surprised by that. But I think you asked, what will it take for people to get the message or get vaccinated if they haven't already? Unfortunately, some people won't care until it happens to them, at which point it's too late. Or if it happens to someone close to them, although I can tell you, I know people who have had close encounters with COVID and still maintain the vaccine's not for them. I don't understand it. But I don't think a global pandemic is the kind of thing that you want to essentially play Russian roulette with, but that seems to be some people's prerogative. And unfortunately, their choice does endanger other people, like children, who can't make that choice because
Right.
there is no vaccine for kids under 12 yet. So it bothers me to the extent that, it's not an individual liberty issue, which I know that lots of my friends have these kind of libertarian leanings, but I find that there are very few choices that you can make in your life that really don't affect other people. And this is just a very clear case where somebody contracting COVID it's not just about kids getting sick and kids dying, it's also the impact on kids' education. Do we want another interrupted school year, which is where we're headed if we don't get it under control?
Before we get into the whole left-right political part of it, the other thing, you were talking about what will it take to get people vaccinated. One of the problems we've had is, in my opinion, very mixed messaging on this. We had the vaccine come out, and then I think it was the Johnson & Johnson, which is what I got, the one shot, was linked to some heart problems in one case out of 1 million or something. So then they want to put a warning on it. Well, you have people who are already skeptical about the vaccine, and now you're putting a warning on it for some 1 in 1 million occurrence. Then you have Pfizer out here in the last couple of weeks pushing for a booster shot, which the health officials say is not necessary. You have an industry, the big pharmaceutical industry, that already doesn't really have the public's trust, and now here they are saying, well, we want the booster, and the CDC saying we don't need the booster. So again, those reluctant people are going, well, wait a minute here. If they're pushing this and you're saying we don't need it, it's not a good way to build trust in the whole process of the development of this vaccine to have those kind of anti-vaccine messages floating around out there.
Yeah, but I'm not. What is the? We talk about messaging all the time on this show. I mean, I'm not sure what, and this kind of goes back to my broader take on this situation. Is like, I'm not sure what can be done to affect or change the messaging that has already been laid out over the last year, and I'm not exactly sure what can be done to get the 20 to 30% of the population right now at this point across the board who haven't been vaccinated to be vaccinated. I'm not sure what it is.
You can't go backwards. Here's what you can do. This is the reason I wanted to bring this up today, is we brought this up on our program the other day, and I said to my co-hosts, right now I believe the 20 highest vaccination rate states are all Democratic states. Of the 20 lowest, I think 19 are Republican states. Disproportionately, the people who are not vaccinated are living in red states. They watch Fox News. They listen to right-leaning talk radio. What we need, so my question to my co-hosts was, at what point is it incumbent upon Republican politicians and conservative media figures to get out front and say, this one isn't left-right, this is life-death. Yeah. Get this thing. We were wrong. My own personal liberal weenie opinion is that the reason a lot of people don't get the vaccine is because they don't want Joe Biden to have a success. I think it's that simple. I've been told I'm crazy about that. I don't think so.
Well, and I still think there's an opportunity, or at least an opportunity being missed, with getting this thing into doctors' offices, and especially in rural communities where primary care physicians are like the single point of contact that people have with the healthcare industry as a whole. You know, it's not like they know who their public health directors are. They don't know these people. They don't know their public health workers. And this has been an issue throughout the pandemic. And I made this point to the folks who are running the regional vaccine hub. Like, you need to do a better job of getting this into doctors' offices. And I think that is still something that's being held up to some degree by the state. The state is still not apparently getting this thing rolling fast enough where it can be administered in doctors' offices when people go in for their daily appointments, as opposed to it being this unicorn that has to be sought out. That is, to me, that is the huge opportunity it's still out there. It's being missed.
But so my question, it's in Walmart. It's in Walmart all over the country. You can walk in right now to your local Walmart and be vaccinated, one shot today, one in a couple of weeks, and you're done. So are you saying that that people will be more trusting of it if it is in their doctor's office? Because the availability issue is just a non-issue. It's all over the country. Any chain drugstore, Walmart, Wegmans, they've all got it. You can go get it right now.
I think there's a convenience factor there, but I don't think that Walmart, at least in our version of healthcare, is not where people go to get healthcare. That might be where they go to hit the pharmacy, because there aren't, many pharmacies left around them, and the big chains are all that's left. But I don't think that necessarily gives those people who are untrusting of these, I'll say, unrelated people, because, right, like, to the people who are concerned about this vaccine, they're concerned because there are all these people who have never given them a shot before saying, you need this shot. Their doctor has given them a shot. Their NP has given them a shot. Their PA has given them a shot. Get it in these offices so that these people can just go to the place where they've always gone, get the shot, move on with their life. I think that's the only way. And I think probably to some degree there's going to have to be a lot of conversations that happen, and it may not happen on the first try, right? Like, I think we've talked about that before. I think it may take 2 or 3 visits for a patient who goes to the doctor, say, every 3 or 4 months, as sort of like a routine blood work kind of thing.
I understand what you're saying from a trust standpoint, that if your family doctor, who's been your doc since you were a little kid, says you need this, that maybe you're more trusting. But there's still that messaging issue. As I drove up here this morning on our station, the substitute host for Brian Kilmeade was talking about the jackbooted government thugs knocking on your door to see if you're vaccinated. I mean, this is the message that's why people in Arkansas aren't getting vaccinated, because their radio tells them they shouldn't, their TV tells them they shouldn't, their governor tells them they shouldn't, and their friends on Facebook tell them they shouldn't.
So I guess to some degree it's like 2 different scenarios we're talking about, right? Because I'm thinking about this more through the lens of, now that I think about what I just said, I'm thinking of this more through the lens of, like, who isn't vaccinated in upstate New York, as opposed to who isn't vaccinated in, say, Alabama or another state that maybe has like 70% of the population still not vaccinated.
Right.
That is a whole different. You need that mass messaging for sure.
What we need, and this is what I brought the other day, we need Donald Trump to go on the television and say, I was wrong about this one. It's more serious. Don't die. Don't get sick. Get this shot. That is, honestly, that's what we need. Now, is that going to happen? No, that's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen. Any other thoughts there, Jackie, as we close this thing out?
I'm not willing to say we need Donald Trump for anything.
Well, there is that. I do agree with that. Because media is so partisan right now.
If you're going to catch fish, you got to use the right bait.
It's sad. It's a sad commentary on where we are, I think.
But to Ted's point, I do think it would make a big difference if those right-leaning news organizations and hosts of those programs that are being consumed at mass level changed their messaging, yes, I think that would make a difference.
At least if you don't come out fully pro-vaccine, at least stop the negative stuff. Stop the Joe Biden is sending out his army of thugs to drag you off and get vaccinated. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's also funny that, and I think back to, 2 months ago, when we were still in the spring and this whole thing, the whole vaccination process was still playing out pretty invasively when we were crawling through the 20, 30 to 40% numbers around here. Interesting listening to people who were very opposed to getting the vaccine openly say, well, once the government requires it, like most other vaccines, I'll go get it. But until then, it's my choice. And it's almost as if is that really what's going to be necessary? I think that is a terrible commentary on where we stand as a society right now, but hey, it is what it is. Another topic here, Canandaigua residents along East Lake Road are building loud opposition to a 116-unit townhome development. The developers ask, if not here, where else? Local residents, unsurprisingly, say anywhere else, but it's undeveloped area, and that corridor, I'm referring to Canandaigua, Farmington, Victor, remains hot in terms of housing development and housing demand. The people who live there say it's going to do three things: increase traffic, reduce safety on the road and around the roads, and could even impact property values. There's also some concerns about view of the lake being obstructed or access to the lake around that portion of East Lake Road being obstructed. But if you look at property values around there, property values are very, very high. And as we go back to this housing issue, which is why I wanted to talk about it today, how is any community supposed to navigate what is a clear shortage of housing across the board if it's universally opposed for one reason or another, no matter where it goes? Because we hear this, I've heard the same thing, the same complaint along the 332 corridor, that it's essentially morphing into residentially developed Jefferson Road in Rochester and Henrietta, for those who aren't familiar. But we need housing. Like, take a look at the real estate market, and this isn't a new issue. There's been a housing shortage in virtually every community. What's the solution? How does this conversation start? Jackie, with your experience and your background, I'm actually kind of curious, when you read this story, what your thoughts were and what a possible solution to this kind of debate could be.
Well, I think it really is a countywide issue that needs countywide leadership. And it's the kind of thing that a county housing policy, if we were any other metro region, we would have this. But again, I think our region is always slow to catch up with things that are shown to work in other communities. So I think that having a county housing policy which looks at the way zoning, density, traffic, various impacts. I mean, I guess the Lakeview is of less concern to me in this regard, along the very pricey properties of Canandaigua. But, I think that a housing policy is not just about housing, it's about economic development. And what you're seeing here is, by the county punting on this issue and just letting developers make the policy by default, you're seeing this logjam between economic development, because people want to be close to where certain jobs are, and housing development, and then new employers wanting to be close to where the housing is, and it's compounded. But no one ever looks at housing as an economic development issue around here, because they see the two as completely different. And until we get some planning that's forward thinking and actually looks at what has been proven to be effective in similar circumstances, we're not going to get out of this, because it's going to come down to each municipality being approached by a developer about a piece of land that they hadn't thought of before. And it's haphazard, and haphazard policy is bad policy.
Does it seem like, at least looking from the outside, that these planning boards, these town municipal boards, are well equipped enough to deal with these kinds of processes, because that to me is the thing that stands out. I look at most town boards and I look at most planning boards and I say to myself, man, these are not the people who should be making these decisions. No offense to any of you, but if you have a full-time job and you are volunteering for a planning board, maybe like 1% of you are actually like equipped and putting enough time in to warrant the level of importance that the decisions you're making actually have on the community.
But that's my point. That's not even the job of the planning board. A planning board should be just checking boxes to make sure that a project conforms with an already adopted plan.
Right.
But what we're seeing is that, well, there's no plan.
There's no plan. So
now the planning board has to be the gatekeeper of every community standard that a policy-making body actually should have figured out. And I mean, that has been, I'm sorry, that just touched on an issue that's been a thorn in my side for years. Ontario County ignores economic development and housing to the peril of all of us living in Ontario County, because all they do is look at numbers. They say population's going up, median income's going up, housing value's going up, but quality of life is not going up. Because if it were, people would welcome every new development with open arms. It would be more of what they love. But instead, there is this tension, and it needs engaged policymakers. But how much time does Ontario County Board of Supervisors spend talking about housing?
Well, and I would argue that you're pointing to Ontario County because you've seen that up close and personal for a long time. But
not specific to them.
I would argue watching Wayne County, Seneca County, Yates County, none have any sort of meaningful policies in place in terms of a grand vision. Call it a grand vision for what housing and economic development should look like. Ted, what are you thinking in terms of potential solutions?
I'm always conflicted on these issues because the libertarian part of me says that if you want to prevent something from happening on a piece of land, you should buy it. Having said that, I don't think people are objecting to having housing. They're objecting to having 115 houses that look alike drop down in what used to be a field where they could walk the dog. And then there's the disconnect between what we need, which is affordable, low to middle income housing, and what developers overwhelmingly want to build, which is high-end stuff. And they always wind up overbuilding, so you'll wind up with this big lot and it'll have a bunch of streets cut in it, and half the houses will get built, and then there'll be a recession in 2 years and the other half won't. I mean, look at the giant, humongous development on the lakefront in Canandaigua. They bulldozed the whole lakefront down and put up a handful of apartments, a brewery, and a yogurt store, and that was it. I mean, it's this more mentality. Pave it all over and build on it, and there's no, and like as Jackie said, there's just no thought to quality of life. And that's one of the things we talk about a lot, is that overarching issue. What do we want our world to look like? The place we live, the place we work, the place we shop. What do we want that to look like? And our local representatives aren't equipped to deal with those big questions. They're equipped to deal with the little minutia of today.
Yeah, I guess my frustration when it comes to that part of this is, like, even if this were an affordable housing project, it would be opposed for the other reasons.
Right,
that
right.
We always
Those people.
Right.
Well, I would oppose it also because, again, part of the problem that we have when we talk about housing is we look at market rate housing and we look at affordable housing, when all of the research about successful community development, communities that are actually thriving, show that you have to have a mixed income model. But that requires policymakers saying, for every market rate unit that you build, in that complex, you must also have X number of affordable units. And that doesn't mean like this New York City thing where there's the poor door, right? Where there are the nice places and then there's the little side annex where a few people of low income can live. The idea is that these units need to be integrated into a development, because the middle class is what needs to be restored and built. And middle class is not just people in a certain income bracket. It is the participation and community of people of varying income levels, right? Like the melting pot, the economic melting pot. And we've lost that. And it makes me very frustrated with, again, it's not just the Ontario County Board of Supervisors. This is, I would say, a Rust Belt region problem. People just are like, well, we're just thankful to have anything. You want to put a dollar store in there? Great. Yeah. Look at, you like us. No. You have to have community standards, because if you lose quality of life, you will lose to other communities who are doing it better.
Yeah.
The problem, though, is the race to the bottom.
Yeah.
If you put in those standards in your community, and I'm a developer, I'll go find another community that doesn't, where I can build what I want.
That might be true. I agree to a certain extent that might happen, except when people have the means to choose where to live, they are going to choose the unit plus the amenities. So if you're actually building a community that has the quality of life people want, it won't be a race to the bottom, because the bottom won't be where people choose to live. And that's what we're missing. I mean, all these people who talk about their capitalist market economy, got to let people compete, they don't understand. They are not creating a competitive field. Right. They are subsidizing either directly through tax abatements, or indirectly through lack of standards and policy and not holding people accountable to quality development. They're actually subsidizing their own community's demise. But well, I feel like shouting to, no one's listening.
To that end, I mean, how many times have we talked about housing? Forget townhomes, forget apartments, forget rental units, that sort of thing. Look at the stories we've seen about people who actually live in various communities being priced out of those communities because of the way median home sale prices have just skyrocketed over the last year. My favorite statistic ever that I've seen this year is down in Yates County, where the median home sale price was $126,000 last January, and this January was $225,000 in Yates County.
Wow, I get my house on the market.
Zero connectivity. So that, to me, is, symptomatic of the broader issue. I think the problem now is it feels so much more urgent because we're seeing a convergence of, one, a really hot real estate market, and two, a lack of development over the last 20 years in all of these communities. I always point
well, and Jackie just touched on something important, which, and we've covered that as one of our larger issues, is we have a disappearing middle class. The income gains of the last 30 years have been made largely by the top couple of percent. In my own community of Rushville, I've been there now, I bought my house in 2004, so I've been there for 17 years, and I'm seeing the slow conversion of what were owner-occupied homes into rental units, and just the subtle little change in the neighborhood from what it used to be, because that middle class is being hollowed out.
One follow-up to Jackie's point, and I'm curious, how would or how could a county plan address what is typically a resistance to anything new at all, and also the desired maintenance of low taxes? So I'm gonna point to these smaller, undeveloped municipalities. How do you get people on board with new coming in or change coming in when what we've seen over the last 20 years is to some degree opposition to everything?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of inertia that has to be overcome, and I think we're seeing that on every issue across the board, right? But I think you have to tell people the truth, and you've got to put it in relatable terms that people understand, and you just have to keep saying it, because it's like trying to get your kids to try a new food, right? If you stop the first time people said no, then you're not going to get anywhere. You have to keep introducing the topic and saying, look, I'm trying to explain how it is in not just the community's interest, but your own economic quality of life interest to think about this differently. And, it is trying to explain to people that you actually share these core values of what you want your community to be like. So growth has to be controlled in a particular way. Yep. And that doesn't mean to stop it, but that means to impose standards. And that will mean some developers will say no. And then you'll get backlash from the people who say that you're anti-progress or whatever, because they think anything's better than nothing. But you've got people on both ends of the spectrum, and at some point you just need to say, you know what, again, we're moving to the middle here, where things work and make sense.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. So another one that we're going to primarily use you for the sort of broader explanation here. We're talking about that class action lawsuit involving Casella and the Ontario County landfill. It was all connected to the lackluster odor control efforts that the landfill had been dealing with for what I guess is probably the last 3 or 4 years, I would assume. The settlement fund was established. We know that. There's additional money going towards odor control. But what does that actually mean in terms of like landfill operation is my first question. And the second one being, is this just going to be more of the status quo? Like, does this just mean, money will be handed out to a few people who filed claims, but not much will practically change with how it's operating?
Well, I'll start with that. Yes, I think that's what's going to happen. I don't think much is going to change. But as you were just saying that, it just occurred to me what an effective job Casella has done messaging this as an odor control problem and not an odor creation problem. Like and there's a difference, right? Because we could say, oh, well, they just need to like fix their technology and then everything will be fine. No, the problem, the lingering, stinky problem is that we have a mega landfill that keeps importing a ton of garbage, which creates an odor problem that not only can they not control, but they've done nothing to prevent. So so sorry, I don't know, that was a little bit of a tangent, but just, I think the only way forward on this is for the communities that are impacted by this, primarily Geneva. And Geneva the council had started talking about this and then got lost in the shuffle, but they need to get back to it. There is an actual impact on the communities that host landfills. And that is usually codified in a host community agreement, right? Which Casella has with Seneca County, with Seneca, town of Seneca, and which Seneca Meadows has over here with Seneca Falls. But the impact actually is borne by where the smell goes, where the water goes, where the leachate goes, and is the answer money? No. But if the business model changed so that Casella or Seneca Meadows actually had to pay for their impact, I think landfilling operations in general would change. But these communities need to, it's great that the homeowners class action, and in full disclosure, like I got one of those letters. I'm one of those people in the target area or whatever. But the fact that I got a letter in the city of Geneva shows me that why isn't the city of Geneva getting host agreement treatment, impact statement, or impact payment treatment? And people would say, well, that's because the county's taking care of it. No, the county is not. The county is administering a business contract, separate from impact considerations. So I don't think money will solve the problem, but I think money injected into the business model equation that Casella and Seneca Meadows have been relying on having and keeping for years and years is something that needs to change.
I guess, when I read the story, it felt as though, and I read the story from the Finger Lakes Times, it felt as though there was a lot missing in terms of clear explanation as to who was getting what and how those funds would be spent. Like I believe the figure was $900,000 or something like that for odor control. We'll link to the story in the show notes here, but I believe it was around $900,000 earmarked for odor control. But what does that mean? how does that work?
Well, it's going to be more of those chemical fans, those like perfume odorizers, right? Which are just pumping more chemicals into all our lungs. No, thank you. I would rather not.
But there again, that is like an entirely subjective process, right? Yeah. Like who is to, what does success look like? What does fulfillment of the obligations of the settlement actually look like?
Right.
And it seems completely indefinitive and not clear in any way, shape, or form.
Well, to me, when I zoom out a little bit, I think sometimes we're attacking the problem at the wrong end. If we were less of a throwaway society, there'd be fewer landfills.
Agreed.
They'd be smaller, but we're not willing to do that. We still, it's visit the typical American household on Christmas Day,
right.
And we have a ton of just utterly useless packaging. Must everything we buy be encased in that plastic junk that you have to go find a jackknife to slice open and then immediately throw away? When I go to the sporting goods store and buy a baseball, how come it isn't just in a bin and I grab one and I take it to the counter? No, it's in a plastic cocoon egg that I have to slice open. We pay lip service to it and we put up our recycling posters and everything, but we're still way too much of a throwaway society. It's possible to radically reduce the number of stuff that's going into these places to begin with, and then maybe landfills aren't so lucrative anymore and they get out of the business and say, we don't need to be here anymore.
Well, and to that end, it's a little bit ironic because I think, again, going back to big picture, I don't think there's a good enough plan, which is something you've said over and over again now when we talk about all these issues. There isn't a good broad consensus plan on how to really address the root causes. Case in point, the other night we ordered some takeout with friends, and all of our meals came in these compostable containers, but were wrapped in handy wrap. And it was the irony. Right. We all laughed because one person made the observation, it says compostable right on the top of the container, but it's encased in like a ½ inch of cellophane, and it's like, okay.
Right.
And it's just this,
so it's compostable. How many people who live in Rochester, New York, in the city, have a compost bin out back?
I'm going to say not many. I don't think too many, but I don't know that definitively. So rest of the show, we're going to be talking about Geneva issues, City of Geneva issues, City Council issues, that kind of stuff. I'm going to spare the long context explanations to the questions we are going to debate and talk about. We will link to all of the context in the story, in the post that's on fingerlakeswan.com. So if you want that, if you don't understand what we're talking about, go there and you can figure it all out. But I don't want this to turn into a 3-hour episode. So first and foremost, and this is the question that I've wrestled with personally, watching Geneva City Council function over especially the last 6 months. But
and we use the term loosely.
Broadly, over the last year and a half, is Geneva City Council broken? Given what we've seen for the last year and a half, can we really expect anything productive to come out of this group as presently assembled? And I ask this question because this is legitimately a question that I see posted on social media every single time there is a story that is related to City Council or any of the issues that we will inevitably be talking about here. Ted, I'll start with you, and then we'll be going over to you, Jack. Yeah.
Well, I want to give the council the benefit of the doubt a little bit. For one thing, we had a changeover where a number of new, inexperienced councilors came in. We've also had some tremendously divisive issues that have hit these people. So I don't know that the problem is so much with the council as it is with the divisiveness in our society and the increasing unwillingness of people on different sides of the issue. It used to be, I'll have my say, you'll have yours, I know we disagree, and then in the end we'll hash it out. Now it's, I want my say, and I'm going to yell loudly while you try to have yours and tell you to shut up. I mean, I don't know that the most experienced council in the world can handle that kind of atmosphere.
Jackie?
I agree that what's happening on City Council is a reflection of the community's values. And in that respect, I think council is very much not broken because you want your council to reflect the community, right? So in that way, I think we actually have a council that is not, as in some years past, completely disconnected with what's going on in the community. Yep. Now, on the other hand, there is, unfortunately, and it pains me to say this actually, a lack of leadership in Geneva City Council. And the reason for that is Mayor Valentino, who I supported, worked with, respected, he's a business guy and understands the value of professionalism. Yet in these meetings, his ability to allow and even encourage, in some cases, a deviation from a professional process has been, you can't see it any more clearly than his inability to control the meeting on June 7th. We've had unruly council meetings with the public making commentary. I've never seen a mayor turn control over to the public before in that way. Now, I'm all for public engagement, right? Not saying that, but if people are out of order and if you can't control the meeting and maintain order, that is really the most basic thing. And what bothers me about that is that the narrative that council is broken serves a particular purpose, right?
Yes, it does.
And it's a cynical, nasty purpose of trying to get people to give up. And that is not what people need to do. And I'm sure you heard about the rally, the protest, whatever, the demonstration in front of the police station before the work session on Monday night. And I and other people who were attending were heckled as we were going in. And the guy who was doing it, I said it was like a bad announcement of the bridal party at a wedding, which, the guy's a DJ, so I guess that comes with the territory. But what is the purpose of that? The purpose of that is to try to prevent people from going in and observing, to try to prevent people from participating. And trying to control and shut down council in that way is a threat to community values. So I agree it would be great if we could say, well, you have your say and then you have yours. But some of what people are saying are value statements that you do have to respond to. And it's, I don't know what the solution is, other than I want to say very clearly, I do not believe council is broken, and I don't think people should give up on it. It's that, again, the status quo benefits if people stop talking. And I think the attempt to shut people down, tell them to go home, tell them they don't belong here, tell them everything they do is wrong, that is an attempt to shut things down. And that we can't allow that.
So I think from my perspective, it seems like it's a lack of, like you said, control, management of these scenarios from leadership, right?
Right.
But I also think this bleeds into the city. And I think when I hear people say city council looks or feels broken, it's that they feel like the day-to-day stuff isn't getting done. They feel like this city council has been seated for a year and a half, or maybe a little more than that. And nothing has really happened, or that's what some people feel like.
I disagree with that because, and this, so there was an interesting comment at the work session on Monday night. One of the counselors said, we need to start talking about housing. That needs to be our primary thing. I want to talk about housing. And I went back and looked through the minutes. There's been a lot of discussion about housing in council reports, none from the counselor who says he's concerned about housing. But what I think people are missing is that, first of all, let's just be clear. Government's a bureaucracy. The work gets done even if the policy making is slow. It's always been a slow-moving ship. So, however, the actual stuff that's happening, I mean, you have staff that are out there working on zombie properties. There's a zoning update going through. The item that was supposed to be discussed Monday evening, which is this kind of point of contact legislation, bringing Geneva's housing code kind of into the 21st century on some very basic issues that will improve housing quality. That actually was brought up by Councilor Salamandra a couple of months ago, which formed the basis of this work session. Well, in the meantime, you've got a housing subcommittee who just went to work on it with staff. So there was no need for that discussion Monday night because that piece is already being taken care of. It's already to legal. So I think that the governing of the city is going on, even though the council itself wants to keep saying nothing's being done. I think they're just not aware of all the stuff that's actually being done. And so that's unfortunate. But, it's in terms of the policing issues, certainly the amount of things that have been done on that front are things that councils in the past wrestled with for years. So I do feel like the council is getting some stuff done. Staff is still getting their work done with some input and direction from council. But I think the narrative that nothing's happening is constructed to fill a certain purpose.
Curious, where does the PAB go from where it sits right now, and can it be effective given the divide that is present right now in the city?
I mean, I don't think, I think it's just a bunch of brouhaha, right? The people who were appointed in large part were appointed unanimously. I mean, there's nobody who would look at the board and think that there's anything untoward about its composition. I mean, again, that's like a thing that people are throwing out there to cast, some kind of doubt on what it's going to do. But the board's going to do what it does. Like, these bureaucratic processes do their jobs. That is what happens. It's the same way when the city moved to countywide dispatch, and everybody said that because of the angle of the curvature of the earth, all systems would break down and we would never be able to respond to a fire or police call again. The county 911 system works. The people who operate it are competent. They know what they're doing. It happened. This is how things happen. People aren't used to a new system, but the system, if it's set up in a sensible way and run by competent people, will be fine. And that's the same thing. The PRB is going to be fine.
You sound awfully optimistic about where Geneva sits right now, and I'm frankly stunned by that.
Well, I'm sorry. I mean, I guess I
don't apologize for being optimistic.
I do tend to be optimistic, but the thing is, like, I look at the people who are saying it's broken, and I think, okay, half those people either are brand new to Geneva or haven't been active before. So of course it might look broken to somebody who hasn't seen city government in action, which you can interpret that either way you would like it, in action or inaction. So that this actually, what's happening with this council, with the exception of people actually charging the councilors last time, this is not new. What's new is that for the first time in a very long time, we actually have segments of the population who haven't had a voice and haven't been at the table,
right,
participating and active. And I understand that causes a lot of distress for certain segments of Geneva, right, because they've done everything they can to try to keep certain people from participating. But this is democracy.
Yeah.
This is what it looks like.
Well, and you made another terrific point, and this is relatively new in our politics. We have now people who have decided if they can't get what they want working through the system, they will throw sand in the gears and grind the system to a halt.
Yes. Yep.
That's what we're seeing right now. And I mean, another very good point is a lot of the chaos is the result of more people participating than used to. And going back to what we said at the very beginning about governments liking to be closed and secret, they don't know how to handle it when everybody starts having a voice. So I think I join you in your optimism that I think it's good. A little bit of turmoil means that the people are getting involved and being heard.
Yeah, I mean, democracy is supposed to be messy.
Right, exactly.
There isn't anything that the founding fathers conceived of as American democracy that was neat and tidy. Like, that's a myth. That's a myth. If you have, I mean, yes, I enjoy a boring council meeting because I'm a policy wonk. I like to talk about stuff most people are bored by. But if all your council meetings are boring, something's going wrong. You should be suspicious. Either you live in utopia or everything's broken, right? So I think the fact that council meetings are have people talking is good. However, going back to this professionalism point, certain things need to be reined in, and I'm just going to say this, and I know people are going to be upset about it or whatever, but I will say it is different being a woman on council than it is being a man on council. And this happened to me. This is happening to Laura. It's happening to Jan Regan, which, again, that totally boggles my mind given Jan Regan's involvement in community stuff over so many decades that now there are some people who are like questioning that. I mean, that to me shows that argument's off the rails. But the way, I was told at more than one council meeting that I should go get somebody a cup of coffee. That exists. That has not gone away. And it's still present in these meetings. If somebody is louder or worked up about something, they're hysterical. However, I've seen lots of guys on council get loud and caught up in things, and
they're bold.
That's a bold statement. Good for you for speaking the truth. Give it to them.
And we also we just went through 4 years of a president of the United States who gave people permission to say anything they want.
Right.
You can name call, you can belittle, you can pick out physical features. I've got to blame Mr. Trump for a lot of the coarsening of our public dialogue, because when the president says it's okay to say anything, people believe it and they think, hey, I can show up at the council meeting and I can name call the councilor if I don't like their point of view.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, democracy is supposed to be messy. It's not supposed to be a middle schoolroom food fight. So striking that balance is where the professionalism comes into it. And I again at the last meeting, I want to give credit to people who make good points, but that becomes increasingly difficult when immediately after reading a statement that contains several good points about youth programming and stuff, that same counselor then mocks another counselor using a voice that I just thought, really? I mean, come on. We need to do better than that. And I sent the mayor a little note that just said, if it were me, here's what I would do. I would say from now on, every council member needs to abide by the following rules. You have to say, I believe statement because statement. That's it. And
you're also not, so aren't you supposed to address the chair rather than each other?
Well, we don't have, the city council has no real adopted orders of procedure. I mean, there are guidelines,
right?
But they don't officially use Robert's rules. There isn't. It's just kind of here's how it's been done over the years. But there are things you could do that would keep things productive insofar as good ideas are getting lost, and petty little statements are getting amplified. And it's causing the people who want to say it's broken, so don't bother, to get a lot of evidence in some people's minds that that's true, when really it's not the reality.
And I also think that probably at least part of this narrative is coming from outside the city of Geneva, from people who aren't residents of the city as well. what about this? So one of the things that I've thought about over the last few weeks is I'm wondering how much of this is connected to there not being, because I don't think any of the issues that are being debated right now are necessarily new,
Right.
Especially for the city of Geneva. But it seems like now compared to 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago, there's a lack of good distraction, right? There's a lack of a good distraction that kind of like takes some of the eyes off of that and onto something else, like the DRI application, like
Right.
City manager search, like, you know, some of the things that people are used to seeing happen in government. And I'm wondering if that is kind of part of this, where all of the attention, all of the eyes seem to be on what is essentially maybe like 1, 2, or 3 issues and not much else, even though there are other things happening in the background.
Right. Yeah, I think that that's true. I don't want to say that there's not a lot of good news in the city, because I do feel like there are good things going on in the city. But you're right that I mean, it was a pandemic, and that pandemic had serious financial stresses for the city. And when people are in, it's like somebody's household, right? When you're under financial stress, you have to start wrestling with some of the underlying big issues that you hadn't really been talking about before because you could pretend everything was okay. And it's like, no, we're actually in the point where there's got to be some truth telling about where we are. And some people don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to.
What about the subcommittees that exist and I ask this question kind of broadly because one of the things that I've seen happen in other communities is the subcommittees get lost when the board or the main council gets a little rocky. So when things are a little bit crazy with city council, maybe some of the credibility or maybe some of the focus on the subcommittees that they're deploying maybe aren't as effective, or maybe that would be the view from the outside. Is that a legitimate concern for residents in the city of Geneva, or do you think the subcommittees as they exist are working as well as they could?
They don't. The city charter prohibits committees of council. So council operates only as a council of the whole. So when I referenced the housing committee a minute ago, the
advisory boards or whatever.
Right. Yeah, that's like the COVID task force, which was this collection of, like 30 community agencies. And as the pandemic, we thought, from a public health perspective, our attention could shift a bit. The focus became on housing, people trying to help people not get evicted, not lose their homes, homeowner, foreclosure prevention, and then housing quality, because when people get evicted or foreclosed upon, attorneys and other people get made aware of housing conditions, which sometimes you don't otherwise see. So I think that group, that's a great group of professionals that's doing stuff. But city committees, I think the city would benefit from having some ad hoc committees that could really focus on other stuff. I do think economic development needs to be a priority. Unfortunately, I'm not sure the city council understands what economic development for Geneva could look like. I don't think they've spent enough time with the comprehensive plan and the neighborhood study to actually look at that. I'm not seeing a lot of well-informed discussion about those topics. But so yeah, people should press on their city councilors to speak knowledgeably about policy matters and just try to tune out the rest.
I've ranted about streaming issues for the last, I think, 3 episodes, the last 3 weeks. I don't want to do any more ranting about streaming, but suffice it to say that I think every meeting at any town, city, or village level should be either videotaped and posted afterward or live streamed if it's a large enough entity. And I think the city of Geneva is a perfect example of being able to get streaming under control, but we've seen issues. Thoughts on that part of it? Even though I know you attend most of these meetings in person, you're seeing them happen in the flesh. Like, what? There's a clear benefit to having video record of this, isn't there? Mm-hmm. Even though obviously FLCC is not fulfilling that anymore, the city is doing it. How much of an issue is this moving forward, where you have that kind of looming background threat, where the city of Geneva could at any point just stop recording meetings?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think a technological fix exists, and so there's no excuse not to use it.
It's not hard.
I mean, yes, they need to be streaming the meetings. The Monday night meeting, I think, streamed without issue. I attended, and then, I heard that other people have seen it, and they weren't there, so I figure it the recording must have worked somehow. I will just say, sorry, I did want to take issue that I did see Todd's report about the meeting, which did not really track with my assessment of it. Maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I actually thought that was an excellent example of a pretty professional meeting that talked about policy. I did think they made progress, so I was kind of surprised to see his thing that said that they didn't get anything done. I thought they actually moved forward a little bit, more than a little bit. But yeah, get streaming and then having it post. It's not an either or, right? They should post the meeting afterwards. Gives people an opportunity, if nothing else, to check the record, right? So when they get a message at their house from somebody that tells them this council's broken and they're not doing anything and nobody says anything, well, you can go back and watch the meeting and you can see actually there were several really great points made. Whether they were universally acknowledged or voted into practice, that's a separate question. But I want people to watch it so that they don't lose hope.
Right. Well, and my frustration is born out of how, and I'm not using the city of Geneva as an example here, but I'll say other boards, how bad meeting minutes are.
Yeah.
They are typically very lackluster and about as thin as you could possibly imagine.
Well, Lori does a really good job. I mean,
yeah.
Lori if there's anybody who's gone like above and beyond through this in terms of staff through this pandemic, I mean, her minutes have been pretty good, I think. I've always found her minutes to be pretty good. But I agree, if you actually look at the law, the requirement for minutes is very sparse.
Right.
Like, basically, you just have to record votes. But I think having more comprehensive minutes is very helpful. And I know, like, Ken Camera was the deputy mayor for this work session on Monday, and he kept saying, we want to get the questions into the minutes so everybody knows exactly what we are asking, so that we know there's complete transparency. This is what our questions are, and then we look forward to getting the answers so that no one can misconstrue what was being said or requested.
Yeah. All right. Well, since we've gone about an hour and 20 minutes now, Ted, where can folks listen to you Monday through Friday?
I'm on the Finger Lakes Morning News in Geneva. That's 106.3 FM, 1240 AM, WGVA. In Auburn, it's 96.3 FM and 1590 AM, WAUB.
All right. And Jackie, thanks for coming back. Maybe we'll do it again sometime soon.
I would love it.
All right. That's all the time we have for today. You can listen to Ted Monday through Friday on Finger Lakes News Radio, and be sure to join us back here next week on the Weekend Debrief. We'll see you then.